Hello, hello. Good morning, everybody. So welcome to my talk. This is going to be just kind of an introductory sort of what is StereoKit, how can you use it, why would you be interested in it, that sort of thing. So if you haven't heard about StereoKit, you're in the right place. And if you have heard about StereoKit, I'll be talking a little bit about some of the updates and stuff, but it should be a nice little refresher. So let's see, what have I got next? Okay, so this is me. I am Nick, and I am the primary maintainer for StereoKit. I've been working on StereoKit for almost 3 years now. It's been a little while. And I work on the Microsoft middleware and MRTK team. So I joined this team about half a year ago. Before that, I was kind of developer relations. So I traveled the world and I helped people and I built tools and stuff like that. So this is kind of just like a natural extension of what I was doing before, just like really serious. StereoKit is not a casual project. Let's just say that. So if you've heard of me before, it's possible you might have seen like the mixed reality lighting tools for Unity. That's a project I did kind of when I first joined Microsoft. And before I joined Microsoft, I actually spent a lot of time building tools for the Unity Asset Store. My big famous one there was Fair2D Terrain Tool, which you can find in a lot of really cool games like Rogue Legacy 2 and stuff like that. And I have a Twitter. It's that one right there. So I post a lot of stuff there. If you're interested in like following StereoKit development, I often post GIFs and pretty pictures. I don't post anything that really doesn't move. So like it's all entertainment. Don't worry. So there's what is StereoKit? I gotta say that. And then I have a little video that shows what StereoKit is. So this is kind of like a little clip that just goes through and like gives you an impression of like what you can do within StereoKit. This video is actually at this point, I think 2 years old. I need to go update it. But the neat thing is a lot of StereoKit has very much stayed the same while becoming much more mature over time. So like all of this user interface that you can interact with your hands, this tight integration with the mixed reality inputs that you can use to interact with stuff. And then just kind of covering all the bases, like making sure that you can render things, do physics, load stuff from file. So it covers all of the stuff that you want when you're building a mixed reality application. And like all of this stuff, like you could theoretically do this from scratch. I don't think anybody really does that. I've seen like 1 or 2 people that have gone bonkers with DirectX, and like I'm always really impressed with those people. But you know, it's not fun to do that from scratch. So StereoKit is basically like taking all those low-level things and pushing them out of the way. But it's also not necessarily going so far as a game engine, where you're going like, oh, this supports ray tracing and baked lighting and levels the size of Australia. It doesn't do that sort of stuff. So it's kind of right in the middle where like, I want to make an app, like that's all I want to make. And StereoKit tries to solve that for developers. So the big thing is this is OpenXR based. So like, I remember, I'll talk a little bit more about OpenXR in a bit here, but the nice thing about OpenXR is that it allows StereoKit to run pretty much everywhere. So StereoKit is a cross-platform tool. So it's based off of C#.NET. So if you're a C# developer, this is exactly the sort of thing that you want to see. It ships in a NuGet package, so it's consumed like regular C# libraries are. And then it runs basically everywhere. I don't really know of a whole lot of places where StereoKit can't run. It runs on Windows desktop. It runs on a HoloLens. It runs on Android and Quest. It also has Linux support too, if you're into that sort of thing. I actually have a lot of lovely people who've contributed from the Linux side. There's some fun stuff happening there as well. But like this runs on a Vario. It runs on the Quest. It's great. This is, as far as like destinations, it's got you more or less covered. The only exception that I would really point out is that it doesn't really work with phone-based AR. What I've tried to do is focus this very much on headset-based mixed reality. Like this is something that StereoKit is very good at headset-based mixed reality. I kind of have this perspective that phone-based AR is kind of like a stepping stone to the future. And really what I'm most interested in, and is the future itself. If I have the time and resources later in the future, I'd love to add phone-based AR in the meantime, because it is valuable. But for the moment, that is a limitation that I would caveat to anybody who's interested in adopting. So a little bit about OpenXR. I was actually really excited about OpenXR when it first came out. So Microsoft was a big kind of motivator for a lot of this early OpenXR stuff, and we released a 0.9 runtime for OpenXR. This was a while back, but I saw that and I was like, ooh, that sounds really cool. I think at the time I had been writing Connect for Azure tutorials, and so I was kind of deep into that C API stuff anyhow. And so I took a look at OpenXR. I wrote a small tutorial. So this thing you see right here, this is actually I think 700 lines of C++ code. It's OpenXR, DirectX 11. And it wasn't actually all that long. I was kind of impressed that I could fit all of that into just 700 lines of code. But the real thing that blew me away with this little project was that I could deploy to a HoloLens in 10 seconds. That was absolutely mind-blowing for me. I had been doing a lot of Unity stuff. I had been building spectator view. Spectator view took me a couple of hours anytime I wanted to iterate on device. And so being able to deploy to a HoloLens in 10 seconds was I can't go back anymore. So I didn't. And that's kind of when I started working on StereoKit. This picture over here is not terribly meaningful to all of you, but this is actually my hotel in Japan where I wrote the first line of StereoKit code. This was kind of in 2019 towards the end of doing HoloLens porting labs, where we were helping people port their projects from HoloLens 1 to HoloLens 2. And it was just kind of this experience of helping people with their projects and trying to solve their problems. And I just kind of came to the conclusion that we don't really have great tools for building mixed reality stuff. All the stuff that we have right now is kind of it can do it, but it's not its focus or anything. So I really wanted to make something that was, mixed reality first. But if you're gonna take on something like that, you kind of gotta set some bars here. Building something that can do a whole mixed reality application is a lot of work, and so you gotta limit yourself and say what do I actually tackle? Where do I set my focus? How do I differentiate this particular project from the big game engines out there? So the very first rule is that it is very specifically for mixed reality. Can do some other things too, but it's only incidental. It is very much a mixed reality library. The other thing is to keep it simple. So this is a code-first library. The API, the user experience, the way that you interact with it is through code. This is kind of a good thing and a mixed thing. I can't go up to a designer and say hey, you want to try out my code-first library? It doesn't work well for designers. But it works really well for programmers because the user experience there has been streamlined. If you have a line of code, that line of code does something. It's not 10 lines of code, it's one. That's really important. You have to have a good API if you want to build good products on top of it. The neat thing is if I do have a project, often the first thing that I do is I build a small editor for it. And it doesn't take very long because I have really good UI tools in here. So keeping it simple scopes it down a fair bit, makes it plausible, making it fun. I'm actually a game developer. I'm a teacher. I work in mixed reality, for goodness sake. This stuff is fun, and it should be. And if you're not having fun, then something is wrong with your tech stack. So that was it's not something that I can really turn into a metric here, but it's something that I keep in the back of my mind when I'm working on things. This is also, it's not just for games. So this is the big problem that you encounter out and about, is that a lot of the technology that we're using right now is very much game-centric. And if you're building something for games, which I've spent the majority of my life doing, you build it differently than if you're building it for applications. So I won't say that StereoKit is perfect, but it's much more app-focused than it is game-focused. And in particular, I'll show you. Well, I guess I'll save that for later. But there's some really cool differences between StereoKit and other things. Trivial UI, again, games kind of do this differently. No game has the same UI as another game, and so there's some trade-offs there. And then performance by default. It's hard to perform well on mixed reality device. And so I really wanted to make sure that, like this was something different. Like you can't shoot yourself in the foot. It's kind of important, right? So these were kind of the things that I set out to say, like, this is where it's going to be different. This is where it's going to be standing out to people. So the first thing, mixed reality focused. So it's kind of in the name of itself. It's StereoKit, like stereographic rendering, stuff like that. So from the very beginning, like everything here is kind of designed with this like idea of, like interacting with hands, having volumetric user interface. Like it's just designed for stereo sort of environments. Like there's a lot of overlap with just 3D in general, but in places where there's kind of like a difference, like having a camera or a world stage or something like that, this is where StereoKit goes and says, like, this is a real mixed reality space. And so like this is kind of some of the primitives that you'll find inside of StereoKit. Like doing this, like this is just putting a handle on an object. You get like right away, it's this one line of code where you get, the ability to grab something, grab it with two hands, move it around and interact with it. Over here, this is basically taking the user interface system that is there and applying it to a GLTF model. Like it's really nice to be able to have this kind of flat style user interface that people are used to, but then it's also really nice to have objects in your world that you can interact with. And so the user interface applies in all of those cases. And then we have a lot of really interesting mixed reality sensors, inputs and outputs. And so I want to have like really easy access to all of those things. So like this down here, this is HoloLens's eye tracking. This is like input.eyes and you get like a array, like it's that easy. If you want the eyes, one line. Up there we have some scene understanding stuff. This is mostly just kind of like world occlusion and collision stuff. And that's also like, I don't remember exactly the line, but world.enable occlusion or something like that. Like it's super, super easy, built right in. This is taking that world mesh and then applying some lighting to it. So like you have your illuminated environment with some virtual objects, pretty cool stuff. That's the QR code API. Like I have a small tutorial about that on the doc site, and it's really easy to do and super nice. Like that's just awesome. I love QR codes. And then also hands first. So this is something that I kind of set down and said, like, hands are really important. So StereoKit always provides you hands, like full articulated hands. And so you can kind of see like over here, this is with a mouse. If you have a mouse, you get this kind of like simulated hand and stuff like that. Same thing with any sort of controllers. It gives you these basic gestures. There's also a whole collection of tools for like inserting poses and stuff like that to your hand. So like if it's, I kind of have generally felt like if you are building an application, it should be with hands and not controllers. Controllers are really good for like fine-grained interactions. Like sometimes for games, that's fantastic. Or maybe if you have like a really detailed paintbrush or something like that. But for the most part, I feel like the experience should be hand-driven. Like it's this idea, like HoloLens doesn't ship with a controller. And this is basically because like you don't carry controllers around too. Like you take your headset, you stick it on your head and it's done. Like it tracks your hand, you interact with stuff. It's great. Having a controller is just kind of an extra thing that's nice. Like it improves the experience, but it's not the experience. StereoKit does support controllers directly as well if you need those, because again, it is really nice to have them for tooling and stuff like that. But StereoKit will always provide you with a hand, so you can always rely on some of this hand stuff. Okay, so keeping it simple. So this actually means a whole lot of different things at different places, but let's start with just kind of like what it looks like from code. So that first chunk right there, that's hello world for StereoKit. That's the whole thing. So you basically, you use StereoKit, you initialize it, you load a model from file, and then you run the application and draw that model. Like, and this is what you get from that, like the GIF on the right there. That's literally that code then running in a headset. So like you can just like launch yourself into this experience and just start drawing stuff. It's really that simple. And I've tried to keep most of the API basically this level of complex, like model dot from file. It's wonderful. And like this is it works at runtime. That works with just about any GLTF. I've got a nice collection of different file formats, but GLTF is kind of the one that I've kind of like centered around as the primary thing. But isn't that beautiful? Nice and small. And then same thing down here. So this is a very different kind of UI than you may be used to. Like if you're a Windows developer, maybe you like XAML, or if you've been doing web stuff, then like JavaScript, HTML stuff. This is an example of immediate mode user interface. So like one thing that you'll notice there in sk.run, that code executes every frame. So every single frame, it executes your whole app. If you don't draw that helmet on one frame, it doesn't show up for that frame. So it's very much an immediate mode API. And this is kind of like, it's a little bit different from what you may be used to. But the nice thing about this is that it kind of like lets you bring your own architecture, or your own ideas about how to organize something. Like it's not a component system. Like it's not an inheritance tree. Like if you want to do those things, you can wrap StereoKit in that, no problem. Like StereoKit is immediate mode, and that's very amenable to being wrapped in something else. But if you get used to this immediate mode idea, it's actually kind of nice. Like you can just have an array of models, an array of transforms, and just like plop them where you want it. Boom, you have a scene. Like no complicated hierarchy or scene graph or anything like that. And like for most people, that's more than enough. And it's also a lot more performant too. But so here, just kind of like to go through this. This is a begin and end for the window. So that creates the window itself. We have a button. This one button doesn't do anything because we're not like checking an if on it, but you can kind of press it and it clicks and makes noises. This one, if you press the button, it returns true for that frame and you do the thing. Like, pretty sweet. Like, this is great. I honestly like really love immediate mode user interfaces, and StereoKit, the user interface, like it's just a joy to go and create a really quick user interface like this. Like, isn't that wonderful? Like no dragging, no dropping, no messing around with little fiddly things. Like that's it. So there's also kind of this advantage, like because StereoKit is entirely code-based, it has a really cool idea. So this ruler right here, that's the code for it. Like don't read the code, like it doesn't matter, it's not important. The important element here is that I can copy this code, I can send it to you in an email or a message or post it on a forum, and you can then put that ruler into your project as well. Just that. Like you don't have to export a package with all the assets. You don't have to like wrap this in some weird object and zip it up or anything like that. This is just code. So the nice thing about having this nice descriptive API that's like terse and composed entirely of code stuff, it allows you to kind of like think about it in kind of simpler terms. Like you're not bundling up a bunch of components or anything like that. It's just a single piece of code. The other nice thing about just having code rather than like code and descriptive files and stuff like that is that the links are very explicit. So if you're trying to debug something and you're like, okay, well, I can look at this with my debug inspector. Like you can look at every single piece of this. The connections are all there. Like you can control click on anything in your Visual Studio or your own IDE. And like there is nothing that it can't see. Like all of this is traceable, all of this is debuggable, all of this is clear to you as a developer, right? Which is really nice. Like it's kind of like maybe a little step back, but in some ways it's very much a step forward. The other thing that I do, I've focused a lot on documentation. So actually, like writing and documentation is kind of one of my weak points, which is why I kind of went a bit of a roundabout way to do this. So I actually built my own documentation system. It's a lot more fun coding a documentation system than it is to write documentation. So what I did is I kind of embedded all the docs inside of the code. So like I usually write a little bit of comments, but basically what I can do, I can put little tags on there like code sample. And when it sees that, it'll say like everything up until end here is a sample that I'm going to scrape and put on the docs. Okay, so this is live code. It gets refactored along with everything else. It gets tested and run every time that I run the documenter code. I get screenshots of it and everything like that. But it just kind of scrapes that all together and puts it into this nice little web page format. So like, I know that this code works because it generated that screenshot. I know that this code is up to date because it's in the same project as the SDK. So like this makes it really easy for me to maintain the stuff that I've written. It makes it very easy for me to write new pieces of code because honestly, like this is kind of what I do when I'm developing. Like if I'm trying to develop something, like I'll write this little piece, and then if I want to document it, I just stick a few comments at the top. So StereoKit's documentation is always up to date. I've tried very hard to make sure there are examples for a lot of the common things in there. I'm still trying to get like a sample for every single thing on there. It's a lot of work, but I'll get there eventually. But it's a nice documentation system, and this is really important for if you're trying to learn something. Like StereoKit may be simple, but it's you still got to learn it. And so I've tried very hard to make sure that the docs are up to that task. And every once in a while, I do like little side projects. Like I try to do for most releases, like some sort of project that will like stress test it. Like right now, I'm actually working on something I'm calling Photogrammetry Explorer, which basically downloads photogrammetry objects from Sketchfab and lets you walk around in them. Still need a little bit to go for it, but it's really cool to be able to like build these nice little projects that really stress some of the new features and then put them out there for people to look at. So this was one I did for 3.1, 0.3.1, where it was kind of like interactive release notes. I just went through each new feature that I did, and I put in a small little example of that in use. So like you can go up onto GitHub and download this and look at the code for each of these individual things. I would love to do more release notes like this. It's a lot of work, but I do have like similar sort of projects that I try to put out kind of regularly. Yeah, isn't that neat? Like this is like a little tool that I have where it kind of puts my skeleton there. I have a little camera tool that like I just tap the button and it kind of records me and dumps it to images I can turn into GIFs. And then like, yeah, it's neat. All right, making it fun. Well, like I said, it's kind of hard to metric this one, but like I do have a lot of fun with StereoKit. Yeah, like I do experiments in StereoKit all the time because it's just such an easy place to iterate and do this stuff. Like the top left is just kind of like taking the skeletal animation system and building in some like pose tools. Like it's a terrible UI, but it totally works and it's kind of fun to do. This one up on the top right, this is actually constructive solid geometry stuff where like I'm actually subtracting geometry and rebuilding a mesh every frame. It's really cool. Maybe not as exciting in a GIF. That bottom left one there, I love procedurally generating landscapes. And so I have like a couple of square kilometers that I can walk around in. I know I just poo-pooed the idea of an engine that can rebuild Australia, but I did it with StereoKit anyhow. It's a little easier when you don't have objects and you can just draw stuff wherever. And then this is kind of like some experiments in user interface where I have this like little hand-based gesture. That's actually in the code base somewhere, and so you can use it. There's some really cool improvements that people in the community have done off of this particular hand wheel. In particular, Jumbly, who's doing Idea Engine on Twitter, like they've taken this idea and really run with it, and it really looks neat. Like honestly, I think this is kind of a winning UX idea, and I'd love to invest more in this concept. Not just for video games. Okay, so this is kind of like, I feel like this kind of illustrates the idea fairly well. So this is a built-in fallback file picker. So if you say like platform.filepicker, it gives you a file picker. And you can use this on like UWP, on desktop, on your Quest. And it just gives you access to the file system where you can then go and load whatever you want. And it does this at runtime. So this is kind of a big difference between a game engine and StereoKit. For a game engine, they're really focused about like drawing stuff really fast and loading stuff really fast. And the issue with that is that you need to compile those assets first. So when you bring an asset into a game engine, it isn't just putting that asset there. Like game engines don't load GLTFs. They take the GLTF, they convert it into a different internal format, they optimize it, they compress it, they do all these things to it. That way, when you load the game, it loads really fast. Unfortunately, this is an offline process. So if you want to do this while your application is running with like a file picker, you got to write your own mesh loading formats. Like you got to write your own code for loading that model, and then it's not optimized. Like you got to make sure that you loaded it right, and like it's not really easy. So StereoKit's asset pipeline is entirely at runtime. So anything that you can load it while the application is running. There's no compressing in advance or anything like that. This does mean that things like load a little bit slower. You're working with like these transmission formats like GLTF. They have JPEGs embedded in them. They have PNGs embedded in them. They take a little while to decode, but you can do it. and it does it pretty nicely. So one of the features that I actually just added in 3.6 was this asynchronous asset loading stuff. So this one right here on the left, this is like a 300 megabyte GLTF. Like this is 300 megabytes worth of PNGs that's getting decoded there. And so StereoKit, basically it loads it up, it tries to display it as fast as it can, and then it just progressively puts in data that it receives. So it just continues to look better. At some point, I'm also going to be doing some optimization here on the afterwards. So like once it loads it, then it goes and optimizes it so it'll draw faster. But this is already really, really nice. You also have a couple of tools for that. Like you can kind of see there's a bar there where it's just kind of like showing the progress. So you can actually watch your assets and say like, has it all loaded all the way? Like you may not want to see that load in process. So you may actually want to wait until it's fully loaded before displaying it. And you can totally do that, you know. But the big thing is it doesn't pause the application. It doesn't block you from drawing it. Like it just lets you go and forget about this idea. So like off of your hands, it's great. This is really nice. The other thing too, like I focus on stuff like this every once in a while. So this is like a full browser just embedded in StereoKit. I think in particular, this is CEF Sharp at the moment. This is just like a little prototype that I did. It's up on GitHub in the StereoKit organization. But you know, like if you want a browser in StereoKit, you can do that. This one may be limited a little bit to Windows devices. I'm not entirely sure the full range of this particular example, but this is the sort of thing that, you know, people ask for a lot. Like when you're building applications and doing like practical application stuff, having a browser is super invaluable. And so I really wanted to make sure that this sort of stuff just worked right away. You know, it's kind of important. So not just games. And similarly, the tutorial that I typically point to, this is something I've kind of called StereoKit Inc. It is it's kind of a line painting thing, you know, like tilt brush or anything like that. But the big thing is that it kind of shows like how to do a user interface. It shows how to do saving and loading, how to like serialize, deserialize, like all this. It's a nice example of building a semi-complete application from start to scratch. And this is, I think it's about 300 lines if you don't include the comments. It's a little bit of a non-traditional tutorial in that I created a GitHub repository and then just like filled it with comments. Like it's comments the whole way through. So it's more about like looking at the code, reading the comments, and exploring how it works. But the core code is only about 300 lines long. So that's a really nice little sample, but it's very application focused. Trivial UI creation. So so this is actually kind of an interesting thought. So I didn't initially plan to put user interface in StereoKit. It's kind of a beast of its own, right? Like building a UI system is intense. So StereoKit's user interface is technically kind of like this separate layer on top of StereoKit, or it's still kind of embedded in it at the moment. And there's possibility that I may kind of like separate it out a little bit in the future, but it's still going to be a part of it. But the big thing is, you know, like when people are building a mixed reality application, in the end, like user interface is really important and you have to have it. I was hoping I wouldn't have to be the one responsible for building it, but I am. And so this is kind of what StereoKit's UI does at the moment. Like you can create these little windows, you can embed these UI elements on GLTFs. You've got a nice bit of tooling to allow you to create your own user interface as well without having to write all these things from scratch. And actually, I'm really proud of this one. I support Unicode the whole way. So if you want to write in Japanese or Cyrillic or whatever, like it's good. As long as it has the right font files associated with it, you can type in Unicode. Beautiful. Oh man, that took a lot of work. Basically what happens is if it sees a character it doesn't recognize, it goes and renders it to an atlas dynamically. So like, you're not paying for this up front with shipping a huge texture or anything like that. It's just like, sees a new character, gives you a new character. Great. This is that little camera that I was talking about. So it's basically like you use one end and the other end to kind of point it in the right direction, and then it has just a little texture up here that shows you what the camera is seeing. So you can change the field of view and where it's pointing and give yourself a nice little preview. Simple but effective. And then I did kind of mention that I like build an editor kind of the first thing when I create a new project. So this is kind of like a little game that I made where it was like dancing and dodging blocks. And so this is a small editor for designing those blocks that you're dodging. So like this whole editor took me, I don't know, approximately a day, maybe two, just to put together all of the user interface and the experience for that. Like there was other stuff that went into it, but the editor was really short. Like that's a light where you're changing the hue, intensity, saturation of the light source. Each of those barriers is kind of like this tiny little grid where you just paint blocks on them, and you have different types of blocks that you can paint. You can move yourself through the menu and just kind of like, or through the level and put little obstacles there. So like it's a bunch of stuff, and not a whole lot of work. It's really great for stuff like this. So like even if this isn't necessarily targeted for designers, that doesn't mean that designers can't benefit from the tooling that you build for them. So that's a different way to pitch this. The other thing too is like I kind of started with my own idea of like back when I was first starting, I wasn't really convinced that UI was going to necessarily be like a core feature. And so I kind of went my own way, made it like really fast to render. Like honestly, most of the UI draws in about 2 draw calls, maybe 3. Like text is 1 draw call, buttons and widgets are another draw call, and then the window panels are like it's super fast and efficient, but it didn't necessarily allow for a whole lot of control. So I've recently been kind of revamping it to do more theming sort of stuff. Right now, I'm looking at the mixed reality design language and using that as my target. So this isn't something like I would not say that StereoKit is MRDL compatible just yet, but this is something that I'm focusing on a lot in the upcoming releases. And this is kind of like you can do this in the current version. I do have a little bit of this work available in the repository if you wanted to try it out, but it's not 100% there yet. So there is some theming stuff built into it, so you can get a little bit of extra visual changes out of the UI yourself if you want it to look different. I know I really like warm colors over cool colors, but it's just my preference, and I don't want to inflict that preference on you. So theming's coming. Theming is already here. It's getting better. All of the above. That's what I have to say about the user interface. And then the last one is performance by default. So one of the advantages of not having to do all this wild and crazy rendering stuff that a game engine might do is that I can step back and say, how can I make this really simple? StereoKit's renderer is actually really, really simple and straightforward. It's basically just a list of draw calls that you submit stuff to. It does instancing by default right away. There's no way to do stuff in StereoKit without instancing. So if you're familiar with like single pass instant rendering sort of options or stuff like this, StereoKit just does that, no problem. The shaders that are built in, I ship with a number of different shaders, and like this is the physically based rendering one. This is a mobile optimized physically based renderer. So this works really fast on mobile. So like if you've got a Quest, if you've got a HoloLens, this is exactly the sort of performance target that I've used as like, this is what I target, this is what I test on. So StereoKit works really well there. And honestly, that doesn't look too bad. The one big difference here that you'll see is StereoKit doesn't actually have real lighting built in. So all of the lighting, or the vast majority of the lighting that you've seen so far, is actually from a single piece of information, and this is something called spherical harmonics. It's basically like a light probe, like just one light probe that you stick in the center of the scene, and like here I'm building a light probe manually by saying like there's a light source over here, it's this color, it's this close or bright, and that's building a spherical harmonic manually. And you can get some really cool lighting off of this. But most of the time, what you'll do instead is you'll take an environment map or cube map, load that in, and StereoKit will create a spherical harmonic for that cube map. And so that's a really simple way to get really nice lighting into your scene that reflects some particular environment or another. And the great thing about this is just like a small chunk of math, and it is really, really fast for doing lighting. So this looks really nice, it is really, really performant, and it's reasonable enough to configure yourself. And this is how StereoKit lights everything by default. You know, like if you're looking for like I need like a dozen point lights that cast shadows. Like this is kind of getting into a game territory. Like most applications don't really need this like really robust lighting system. And so the problem with having a really robust lighting system is if you have it, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot with it. Like if you try 12 point lights, I guarantee you that'll bring any graphics card to a shutter. And so without these complex lighting options, it's just going to perform well because you can't do those things anymore. Now, StereoKit does have a full shader system. Like it uses real HLSL, and you can like do all sorts of fun things with it. But you got to work to do it. So if you want to make it look really nice, if you want to put lighting in there, it's totally capable of doing those things. It's just not there by default. So it kind of means that like if you know what you're doing and you really want to put in something cool, you can do it, and you just have to understand the consequences of it. So, but looks good by default, performs well by default. Okay, so those are the 6 tenets. That's kind of like what StereoKit is and what it does. And if you are interested in it from that, this is kind of where you might go to get started. So I've mentioned that this is like real C#. So my golden path right now is through Visual Studio. There is a StereoKit template where you just go install the template. It gives you a .NET Core and UWP projects. You just create one of those, and it gives you like a bunch of boilerplate code to go with it, like a little bit of an example to get you started. And that's it. Like it's pretty nice. You should be able to just load up that template and hit F5 and go. Alternatively, if you want to do this a little bit more manually, or if you're a Visual Studio Code person instead of a Visual Studio Prime person, .NET New Console, add package StereoKit, and then you put in a little bit of code. Like basically, you remember the hello world thing there that you saw? Like it's just that, you don't really need a whole lot to get started. So if you want to create this from scratch yourself, totally viable option. I know like VS Code has been growing on me a lot lately. It does some pretty cool stuff. This particular GIF also includes some of the .NET Watch stuff. One of the nice things about .NET Watch, I don't know if you've tried it or not, but basically anytime you save the document, it hot reloads the application and reflects your changes right there in front of you. If you check out my presentation after lunch, I'll be demoing some of that with some desktop mirroring. It's absolutely fantastic. You'll love it. But this is kind of cool. .NET does some really cool things. Like they've been doing a lot of great work lately. And then I also have a GitHub repository for StereoKit. So this is on GitHub. It's open source. This is MIT licensed. I don't recommend that you necessarily go here to do things. This is the core SDK. So if you want to build StereoKit from scratch, this is the approach that you go. There is, however, a bunch of code in here. There's a StereoKit test project that has a lot of interesting code in it that you may want to reference. So if you want to go here and look at some of the code for just like learning stuff, this is a nice place. But in most cases, you won't really have to go here for what you're doing. So the website itself, StereoKit.net. Basically, everything is linked from there. Like if you go to that place, that's your one-stop shop for StereoKit needs. The second link there, that is StereoKit Inc., which is the tutorial that I recommend for the GitHub repository with lots of comments. And that'll kind of give you an idea of like how to build an application. There's also a whole bunch of other different things. Like if you go to github.com/StereoKit, this is like an organization for all of the StereoKit content. I've got a collection of different repositories in there that may also be of interest to you for reference. But StereoKit.net also has like a learning resources page on it as well. So there's lots of stuff in those two spots. Now, looking into the future, so right now we're at 0.36. I still consider StereoKit to be a pre-1.0 product. I haven't actually shipped a breaking change in about 1.5 years. So I try very hard to make sure that the API is stable and comfortable, mostly kind of adding features rather than changing features. I've got some changes saved up. They'll come eventually, but I'm saving them to break it the right way. But the big one that I'm really looking forward to next, WebXR and WebAssembly. So if you are, so here's a cool thing. I don't think I mentioned this. StereoKit's core is actually C++. So the interface that you work with, it's all C#. StereoKit is a C# library, but if you get down into the details, you can use it from C++. And some people do, especially for those who are building like middleware themselves. It makes for a nice dependency. But if you're using C++, you can actually build to WebAssembly right away. This is just the simulator. It doesn't include WebXR stuff, but that's what I'm working on next. I'm working on hooking up the WebAssembly stuff to the C# side, as well as hooking up WebXR. Those are things that I think are really important for shipping a product to people who, aren't necessarily easily invested. Like I really love building games and shipping them on web. It is so wonderful to just send somebody a link and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll play that. It's just a website. So that's really powerful, and that's something that I want StereoKit to be able to do. So that's up next. It's what I'm working on. And then I have a collection of other things. So this is kind of like what I consider the list before 1.0. Maybe not all of these, but some of these. 1.0 is actually kind of around the corner. Like I've been working on it for 3 years now, and it's getting close. Like it's almost there. So .NET MAUI multi-targeting template. Right now, the templating stuff is a little bit interesting. Like you got to dance around if you want to hit like UWP and Android and desktop. And the MAUI multi-targeting system will help a lot with that. I almost shipped this before dev days, but then I realized that Visual Studio 17.3 is actually still in preview, and it doesn't make sense to ship that right now. So this will actually be coming probably in the next month or two, which is really nice. The mixed reality design language stuff, that's really important to me, and that'll also be coming up really soon. I've also got kind of a revamp of the user interface to make it like a lot more friendly to people who are designing real interfaces. An anchor system, there's a bunch of OpenXR extensions that dropped recently, and I think it's finally time to build an anchor system. I do have some rudimentary scene understanding in StereoKit right now, but there's a couple of also new extensions to OpenXR. Basically, anytime a new OpenXR extension comes out, I stick it on my list, like, I'm going to do that one. So that's always kind of like work coming from the sky. Compute shaders and a render graph. These I don't think are necessarily 1.0 features, but I feel like these are really important elements for StereoKit as middleware. So like if you wanted to like customize the rendering system to do something bonkers or focus on a particular device or something like that, I think that's kind of nice to have. Compute shaders in particular are really important for optimizing stuff. So those are also something that I'm interested in. Kind of my roadmap. And that's about it. So there is the hackathon that's coming. This is like the next month or so. StereoKit is an option. So this is a really great opportunity for you to give StereoKit a try in some low stakes environments. Like you don't have to convert your product to StereoKit. You can just do a little hackathon and try it out. Like I recommend it. It's cool. The website, my Twitter, and yeah, anybody got questions? Are there any real-life examples or projects that people have published with StereoKit? So there's a couple of interesting things out there. Like StereoKit is still a little bit early. I think I've got thousands of users, but it is open source, so sometimes it's hard to track down what exactly people are doing. There's some really interesting stuff, though. I mentioned Idea Engine by Jumbly, and this is kind of like a mind mapping. It's a really cool little project. He's coming up close on shipping that. Well, actually, I don't know how close he is, but he's getting there. I know he's been asking about like, I'm publishing it on the App Store. Does this thing work or whatever? Like, yeah. So there's that. There's a couple of projects on Linux. Like I know it gets used a lot for like developing hand tracking stuff because working with hands in StereoKit is really, really easy. So like for like. So a lot of research bits. Like the other thing, like I mentioned the C++ thing, because it is C++, it works really well with other C++ libraries. So if you're doing like OpenCV or HoloLens research mode or stuff like that, then StereoKit is a really nice option there because you can just link directly to those libraries. Microsoft's platform for situated intelligence took a dependency on StereoKit recently as well. They're kind of a library that also does sensor-related work for HoloLens too, or more than just HoloLens, just sensor-related stuff for artificial intelligence. So I don't have like a ton of like, here's a product you can go download, but there's a lot of projects that people are using StereoKit for. Yeah, good. Anybody else? Yeah. Do I have a marketplace where people can share their creations? So what I do have right now is a nice GitHub with the discussions and issues pages. I also have a Discord channel where there's a lot of nice people that hang out there and chat. I don't really have any sort of marketplace, but this is something that we've kind of chatted about a little bit. I think like a low stakes thing for this might be to like add a page on the docs that links to a bunch of different projects that are interesting. And if people had something that they wanted to sell and advertise through the webpage, as long as I felt that it was okay, I'd be more than happy to promote people's work through that. So, is that good enough? For now. Maybe when it gets bigger, we'll have something more interesting. But any other questions? Yeah. Okay, so this is about using image targets or other things like vision systems to recognize targets or, okay. So right now you saw the QR code marker thing. This is an SDK that's UWP provides. There's Azure Spatial Anchors. There is actually a tutorial for using that with StereoKit. Well, I have mentioned stuff like OpenCV if you're going down kind of low level, but this is kind of trickier things to do because you have to write that a lot more from scratch. I think this is something where I've really been wanting OpenXR to have a few more tools available to it, and it doesn't really yet. So like image targets, I would love it if OpenXR did something like that. I think Vario might have something for Aruco markers or something similar to that. I haven't implemented that, but it probably wouldn't be too difficult to do in the near future. So it's kind of a mixed story there right now. But there's a few things that can get you going with that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so this is if the UI could be embedded in something else or some other UI could be embedded in StereoKit. Yeah. Okay, so like I did mention, the UI that is currently there is built on top of StereoKit rather than integrated tightly. So in theory, and what I kind of hoped would happen is that somebody else would come along and write a UI system for StereoKit. You can do it. And in fact, in some ways, it might even be a good idea to do. Like the immediate mode system is actually fantastic, but it's very different from what a lot of people are used to. Like you might actually want a XAML system or something like that. So you could write something on top of it. As far as things go, like I've generally built StereoKit to be lightweight, so that like if you want to build something on top of it or build some layers somewhere in between, like you should be able to do it. I think there's a lot of room for that sort of thing. Just yeah, it's some work. Yeah, cool. And I think we'll do one more question because I think we're coming up on time. So yeah, go ahead. All right, this is a lovely question. Do you need a headset to develop for this, or can you do other stuff? So StereoKit has a flat screen simulator that's built in as like a first-class citizen. So like if you launch it and OpenXR doesn't find a headset connected, it launches a flat screen window with a simulator that kind of behaves like a headset. And so I use this for development all the time, and I guarantee you it's pretty nice. Like it sometimes like you still kind of have to have the headset for some of those like little details and stuff, but it's totally fine without. Yeah. Uh-huh. And that's all for now. I think it's about lunchtime, so feel free to grab some food. I'll have another talk after lunch. It's going to be on, like, I'm just going to show you some code and some of the templates and like how to create a project. And then after that, if you're interested, I'll do a deep dive into StereoKit's internals and architecture. It should be gritty C code. So some people might like that. I might just be talking to myself for that one. We'll see. All right, thanks for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it. I got some stickers up here, too.